On September 5, 1977, as the early autumn brought a slight chill to the city of Cologne, Schleyer sat restlessly in the back seat of his Mercedes-Benz. As a leading figure in the industrial sector of West Germany, he had been under considerable stress recently. His firm stance against labor organizations had made him many enemies, the most dangerous of whom were members of the Red Terror, a network of urban guerrilla groups wreaking havoc across Europe. Schleyer had become a prime target for these city assassins. The West German security agencies had recently informed him that he was on the kidnapping list of several terrorist organizations, and they had assessed his security risk at a substantial level 3. Consequently, he had to live under the constant protection of armed bodyguards. Although Schleyer had once served as a lower-ranking assault leader in the SS during the Third Reich's Western Front campaigns, he quickly shifted away from frontline duties to pursue a career in Nazi Germany's political arena. Strictly speaking, he was a seasoned politician and a skilled entrepreneur, though not exactly a soldier by qualification. Despite his driver being armed with a handgun and the presence of an armored guard vehicle trailing his Mercedes, equipped with 3 bodyguards wielding submachine guns, Schleyer remained deeply anxious. In West Germany, several high-profile individuals had already fallen victim to assassinations by urban guerrilla squads, such as the Attorney General Siegfried Buback, who was ambushed by the infamous Red Army faction on April 7th while en route from his home to his office. Siegfried Buback and his driver were both fatally shot inside their car. As Schleyer's motorcade turned a corner, a couple pushing a baby stroller crossed the street. To avoid them, the driver slowed down. Suddenly, a green Benz parked by the roadside started reversing and blocked the road, forcing Schleyer's car to brake sharply. In that instant, multiple gunmen, including the couple who pulled weapons from the baby stroller, emerged and opened fire on Schleyer's convoy. Their objective was to kill Schleyer's bodyguards. Schleyer, huddled in the back seat and trembling, was dragged out by the gunman and shoved into a sedan, which then sped away. This was indeed a kidnapping executed by the Red Army faction. They soon issued a statement claiming responsibility for the incident, to force the West German government to release several recently arrested leaders of their group. The Red Army faction was one of the most notorious communist terrorist organizations in Europe at the time. This organization, adherent to communist ideology, aimed to destabilize Western capitalist governments through urban guerrilla warfare in preparation for the ultimate overthrow of capitalist societies and the establishment of a communist society. They received support from the Soviet and East European governments, ranging from funding to weaponry. The Red Army faction also had close ties with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine in the Middle East. Members of the faction often traveled to PFLP training camps in Yemen for training before returning to West Germany to conduct terrorist attacks. The news of the Red Army faction's kidnapping of Schleyer and their statement were tightly suppressed by the West German government. As the government was grappling with this issue, a new crisis unfolded. On October 13, 1977, at 1:30 p.m., Lufthansa flight LH-181 took off from Palma de Mallorca Airport, bound for Frankfurt in West Germany. The Boeing 737 was carrying 86 passengers and 5 crew members. The pilot, Jürgen Schumann, had previously served as an F-105 fighter pilot in the West German Air Force. As LH-181 flew over the Mediterranean and approached France, 4 hijackers, 2 men and 2 women, wielding pistols and hand grenades, seized control of the plane. The 1960s and 1970s were peak periods for terrorist organizations hijacking commercial airliners. At the time, Western countries' civil aviation systems lacked a sufficiently rigorous security screening system, allowing hijackers to easily board planes with weapons. Before the hijacking of LH-181, there had already been numerous cases of aircraft hijackings. On board LH-181, the hijackers were armed with 2 types of pistols, a 7.62mm caliber TT pistol and a 9mm Makarov pistol, both military handguns from the Soviet Union and Eastern European countries. Additionally, they were equipped with hand grenades
and C4 plastic explosives.
The leader of the hijacking team was Zohair Youssef Akache, whose parents were Palestinians forced to leave Palestine in 1948. In the early 1970s, he moved to the UK, where he studied aeronautical engineering in London and took flying lessons, enabling him to pilot light aircraft. He joined the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine immediately after finishing high school, attracting the attention of British security agencies during his stay in the UK. Nevertheless, he was still able to travel freely throughout Europe and the Middle East. His three accomplices were also members of the PFLP, hailing from Palestine and Lebanon. On October 13th at 1610, Flight LH-181 first made an emergency landing at Rome Airport in Italy, where the hijackers demanded that the Italian government refuel the aircraft and supply food and water. The Roman authorities complied. While at Rome Airport, they swiftly issued a hijacking statement, demanding that the West German government release the arrested members of the Red Army faction, and also requesting the Turkish government to release detained members of the PFLP. This hijacking was closely linked to the kidnapping of Schleyer. On October 13th at 1740, the plane departed Rome for Cyprus. By 2040, the aircraft landed at Larnaca Airport in Cyprus. The Cypriot government attempted to negotiate with the hijackers, but they refused to engage. At this point, the West German government had initiated an emergency rescue operation. Members of the newly formed counter-terrorism unit, GSG-9, had already flown to Cyprus, but the hijackers did not provide an opportunity for GSG-9 to launch an assault. At midnight on October 14th, LH-181 departed Cyprus. At 4:45 on October 14th, after being denied landing by several countries, LH-181 finally landed at Bahrain Airport. However, after a brief stop, the Boeing 737 took off again an hour later, this time headed for Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. At 5:40 on October 14th, LH-181 landed at Dubai Airport. At this time, West Germany's State Minister Wisniewski flew to the Middle East on a special aircraft. He would play a critical role in diplomatic negotiations to facilitate a successful GSG-9 raid. Following him on another plane was GSG-9 Commander Ulrich Wegener, whose primary goal was to gather as much information as possible about the situation inside the hijacked aircraft, particularly regarding the hijackers. GSG-9 was established by the West German government following the tragic events of the 1972 Munich Olympics to address the growing threat of terrorist activities. During its formation, the GSG-9 unit received significant assistance from the British Special Air Service. The SAS had been conducting special operations since World War II and had gained a wealth of experience in counterinsurgency and urban warfare during the post-war conflicts in various former British colonies. Following the hijacking of LH-181, the British government also ordered the SAS to take whatever actions were possible to support the West German government. 2 SAS members, a lieutenant colonel and a sergeant, were dispatched to the Federal Republic of Germany, where they provided technical support to GSG-9 and introduced a new weapon, the G60 stun grenade. This weapon would play a crucial role in the operation to storm the hijacked aircraft. Over 10 GSG-9 members even experienced the explosion of a G60 grenade within a simulated narrow space of a Boeing 737. After being subjected to the blinding light of 30,000 candela and the deafening noise of 160 decibels, many GSG-9 members struggled to maintain their footing. Returning to October 14, 1977, at 11:30 a.m. at Dubai Airport, the UAE Armed Forces had surrounded LH-181 with tanks. The UAE government refueled the Boeing 737 and supplied it with food and fresh water. During this time, GSG-9's commander Wegener also received crucial intelligence. One particularly important piece of information was relayed by the hijacked plane's captain, Schumann. Seizing an opportunity, Schumann used the radio to transmit details, informing the police of the number of hijackers. As the hijackers exchanged food with airport staff, police managed to capture images of the hijackers, noting their attire, T-shirts emblazoned with Che Guevara's portrait. The hijackers continually pressured the passengers, threatening to execute one suspected to be Jewish. Captain Schumann and flight attendant Gabriele Dillman tried to calm the hijackers by suggesting a birthday celebration for a flight attendant whose birthday was that day. The hijacking group's leader, Akachi, agreed and requested a birthday cake and some champagne from the UAE government, allowing all the passengers to celebrate the flight attendant's birthday. Due to a lack of fuel and mechanical issues, the plane's air conditioning failed, causing temperatures inside to soar to 49 degrees Celsius. Many passengers began to faint and vomit, which heightened the hijackers' anxiety. After urgent communications with the airport, Dubai provided the plane with fuel and repair services for the air conditioning. However, negotiations between the UAE government and the hijackers failed, as the hijackers refused to release any hostages, including women and children. Under the threat of the hijackers executing hostages, the UAE government agreed to allow LH-181 to take off. On October 16th at 12:19, flight LH-181 took off, heading towards Oman, but the Omani government closed its runways and refused the plane's landing, forcing it to redirect to Yemen. However, the Yemeni government also denied the plane's landing request and closed the main runway at Aden Airport. At this point, the aircraft had only enough fuel for 25 more minutes of flight, and if unable to land, it would crash in the desert. This was one of the most perilous moments of the incident. The two pilots of LH-181 noticed a strip of sand between two runways that could be used for landing. They maneuvered the plane and forced it to land in this area. The landing was extremely perilous. The pilots even activated the engine fire extinguishers. However, the plane ultimately came to a stop at the end of the runway. Yemeni government forces surrounded the aircraft with armored vehicles and ordered it to take off again. Concerned about potential damage to the landing gear and engines from the rough landing, Captain Schumann insisted on exiting the aircraft to inspect it. After his inspection, Schumann found that the engines had ingested a significant amount of sand and debris, and the landing gear was damaged, but still supportive. A Yemeni Special Forces commander present later testified that Schumann tried to explain to the Yemeni officers on the ground that the aircraft required maintenance before it could safely fly again, risking passenger safety otherwise. However, this time, Schumann spent outside the plane was too long for hijacker leader Akache, who suspected Schumann was attempting to escape. Enraged, soon after Schumann returned to the aircraft alone, he tried to explain to a nearly uncontrollable Akache that his prolonged absence was due to seeking help from the Yemenis, but Akache had completely lost his reason. He knocked Schumann down and shot him in the head, killing him instantly. According to co-pilot Jürgen Viator, the atmosphere inside the cabin was eerily silent, without a single sound. Now, the responsibility of piloting the aircraft fell on Viator's shoulders. At 1 a.m. on October 17th, Yemeni authorities finally brought a fuel tanker to refuel the aircraft and then ordered flight LH-191 to take off immediately and leave Yemen. Schumann's body was dragged to the aircraft's rear storage compartment. At 02:02 a.m. on October 17th, with the scent of blood still lingering, Vitor piloted the Boeing 737 away from Aden Airport. The news of Schumann's death quickly reached the West German government, increasing the pressure on the GSG-9, who needed to find an opportunity to act soon, as the hijackers were losing control. At 06:45 a.m. on October 17th, the plane flew over Mogadishu International Airport in Somalia. Viator, piloting the damaged plane, made a textbook landing. The aircraft came to a smooth stop on the runway. Akache told Viator that he was now free to leave the aircraft and flee alone, as there was nowhere else for the plane to go. After a moment of consideration, Viator decided to stay with the crew and passengers. Due to the hot weather and to prevent Schumann's body from decomposing, it was thrown onto the runway through the rear door of the plane and taken away by the Somali government. Somalia was a suitable location for resolving this crisis. Since 1968, the country has been under the dictatorial rule of President Barre. Although he established a socialist regime in the country, like many African nations during the Cold War, he swung between the Eastern and Western blocs. The Soviets provided military aid to Somalia, but President Barre did not refuse economic assistance from Western nations, particularly financial support from European countries, which could alleviate Somalia's economic problems. For West Germany, this was an avenue for diplomatic bargaining. In other words, economic aid could be exchanged for Somali support for the West German government's handling of the hijacking, especially in supporting the planned raid by the GSG-9. For the hijackers, it seemed they too decided to make their final stand in Somalia. They would either force the West German government to meet their demands or go down with the passengers of flight LH-181. They poured fuel and alcohol inside the cabin and placed bombs, setting a final deadline. If their demands were not met by 16 Gang that day, they would blow up the aircraft. The West German government had ordered that this crisis must be resolved in Somalia, and the GSG-9 unit was given permission to act. To buy time for the operation, German negotiator Wisniewski was authorized to offer false promises to the hijackers. Wisniewski informed them that the West German government had fully agreed to their demands, that prisoners in Germany had been released by the government and were being flown secretly to Mogadishu. This process would take some time. Thus, Akachi agreed to extend the final deadline to 02:30 a.m. on October 18th. Somali soldiers surrounded the aircraft from a distance, while inside the presidential palace, German envoy Wisniewski and President Barre were engaged in final negotiations. Initially, President Barre wanted the Somali military to conduct the raid themselves, but Commander Wegener was adamant that only the GSG-9 could successfully execute the assault. Eventually, with the backing of West German Chancellor Schmidt, Wisniewski persuaded President Barre to allow the GSG-9 to carry out the operation, with the Somali military providing support. The GSG-9's Boeing 707, once authorized, entered Somali airspace. The aircraft circled overhead, waiting until nightfall before turning off its lights and landing at the airport. It taxied to a position behind a dune, 2 kilometers from flight LH-181. Commander Wegener quickly conducted a reconnaissance of the airport. Despite the lack of terrain or buildings around the hijacked Boeing 737 that could offer cover, the aircraft was vulnerable from the rear, since all windows except those in the cockpit had been sealed by the hijackers. Additionally, the intense airport lights illuminating the front of the plane cast shadows behind it, providing excellent cover for the assault team to approach. Wegener had 60 personnel under his command, including 28 GSG-9 members and 2 SAS members forming the assault team responsible for the direct attack. The primary weapons for the assault team members were MP5 submachine guns, known for their accuracy and reliability at close range. This German submachine gun soon became the standard issue for Western special forces and police units. Due to the narrow confines of the Boeing 737's cabin, which was also packed with passengers, most of the assault team members were equipped with pistols for combat. Some GSG-9 members were armed with German-made 9mm P6 pistols, a new model jointly developed by Switzerland and Germany, which had just been adopted by the West German police. However, fearing jamming issues, the foremost members of the GSG-9 were armed with .38 caliber revolvers. These lightweight and lethal handguns were ideal for combat in tight spaces. They also minimized the risk of bullets penetrating through the hijackers and injuring passengers and were less susceptible to jamming and misfires. The assault team members were dressed in civilian clothes rather than combat uniforms. Politically, this attire made it more acceptable for the Somali government to deal with GSG-9 members in civilian clothing rather than German military uniforms. However, the GSG-9 members still wore thick bulletproof vests, which provided effective protection against the handguns used by the hijackers. All assault team members opted not to wear helmets, believing that helmets could obstruct their view inside the aircraft and might reflect light while approaching the plane. The operation plan was straightforward. The assault team would approach the aircraft from the rear. There were 6 entrances to the plane, with each entrance assigned to an assault team. Once all teams were in position, a few hundred meters away on the runway, Somali soldiers would detonate barrels of gasoline, creating a massive fireball to momentarily distract the hijackers. Simultaneously, the assault team members would storm the aircraft through the 6 entrances, eliminating any hijackers they encountered and guiding passengers to escape through the emergency exits. The key to the plan was secrecy and surprise. Given that the hijackers had poured large amounts of flammable liquids inside the cabin, the use of flashbang grenades was no longer considered, placing even greater reliance on the team members' training. The operation officially commenced at 2:00 a.m. on October 18th. Team members began their stealthy approach towards the aircraft. At the control tower, the negotiation plane informed the hijackers that the aircraft transporting the released prisoners had taken off from Cairo. The reconnaissance team reported that the hijacker leader, Akache, was currently in the cockpit. At 2:05 a.m., all assault team members were in position. Meanwhile, Somali soldiers ignited barrels of gasoline in front of the runway, creating a massive fireball that illuminated the runway and drew the hijackers' attention to the front of the aircraft. At 2:07 a.m. the operation began. SAS members each threw a stun grenade near the cockpit and wings from outside the aircraft, the loud bangs further disorienting the hijackers and serving as the signal to start the assault. All 6 doors were simultaneously blown open, and the assault team members rushed into the cabin, loudly instructing passengers in German to stay down and not move. A female hijacker encountered by the assault team near the cockpit was shot and incapacitated immediately. Akache burst out of the cockpit firing at the assault team but was quickly shot. He turned to retreat into the cockpit but was shot again in the back, falling at the cockpit door. In the middle of the cabin, a second male hijacker fired at the assault team but was quickly brought down. He attempted to throw a grenade but was shot again before he could do so. The grenade exploded in the aisle, causing minor injuries to several passengers and a flight attendant. The last hijacker, a woman, was in the restroom. Hearing the gunfire, she attempted to shoot at the assault team members from inside, but they returned fire through the door, killing her inside the restroom. Of the 4 hijackers, apart from the first encountered female hijacker named Suhaila Andraoes, who was wounded, the other 2 male hijackers and 1 female hijacker were killed. 1 assault team member, 3 passengers and 1 crew member sustained minor injuries. The operation was deemed a complete success. Commander Wegener sent a coded message via radio to those anxiously waiting in the control tower. Springtime, signifying that the operation was successful. This message was also immediately transmitted over the airwaves to an anxiously waiting Chancellor Schmidt in Bonn, Germany. All passengers and crew members who escaped the plane were properly cared for, and everyone was overjoyed to have survived the hijacking. Reporters captured many memorable photos, including one of flight attendant Gabriele Dillman embracing her fiancé Lutzow, who was the co-pilot of the Boeing 707 that transported GSG-9. And hours later, a special plane returned them to Germany, where they received a warm welcome. The news of the rescue of the passengers of Lufthansa flight LH-181 spread throughout Germany. Shortly thereafter, 3 members of the Red Army faction imprisoned in Germany were found dead, all declared by authorities to have committed suicide, with a 4th attempt failing. On the afternoon of October 19th, the body of kidnapped German businessman Hans-Martin Schleyer was found in the trunk of a car on a street in Mulhouse, Germany. The Red Army faction claimed he had been executed. Following the Landshut crisis, the German government declared it would never negotiate with terrorists again. Chancellor Helmut Schmidt received widespread acclaim among Western countries for his decision to storm the aircraft to rescue the hostages, though the action was also met with some criticism. Some believed the West German government had executed the imprisoned Red Army faction members as retribution for several severe terrorist attacks. The members of the GSG-9 unit became heroes in the eyes of the West German public. Their success helped to redeem the West German police force, especially after the disgrace of the Munich incident. In the fall of 1977, the series of assassinations, kidnappings and hijackings in West Germany were believed to have also influenced the development of the West German constitution. In responding to the Red Terror organizations, the West German government broke many legal constraints on the government, an impact considered long-lasting for Germany. This series of events became known as the German Autumn. This is the story of the Lufthansa Flight 181 hijacking that occurred in 1977.